We're back live, and joining me now are Charlie Savely and Philip Edsel from the Alpha Imaging Collective. Charlie and Philip had a chance to use the Alpha 1, and we're talking with them about what they did with the new cameras. Charlie and Philip, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Charlie, I'd like to just kind of start off with you. From your home base in Alaska, you took the camera into some pretty extreme conditions. Can you talk a little bit more about what you shot and how the camera worked for you?
Yeah, we traveled up to the Arctic here. We shot in glaciers. I did a kind of really intense musher training where I had my own dog sled team. One day, I believe it was -55, so we were in really harsh, tough conditions, and it was amazing.
Charlie, can you maybe talk a little bit about just what you do? I think I probably jump started the conversation a little bit, and as soon as you mentioned that you have a dog sled team, I imagine there's some people out there who are wondering what's going on where this person has a dog sled team.
Well, I don't personally have a dog sled team, but that was part of the experience where I learned how to be a musher, and I was working with this amazing lady that's been on the Iditarod, and we were just shooting through those conditions, lots of movement, dogs running. We also saw a bunch of wildlife, which was also epic and perfect to test out with the camera.
Talk a little bit about the wildlife that you were photographing and how it worked in those conditions.
It was amazing. The new A1 has eye focus now, in addition to animal and human, so I was really enjoying that. I got to photograph some caribou, muskox, bison, and of course the huskies, and the camera kept up, and I was super, super impressed.
Awesome. And in those, really cold conditions, which can be, a little bit taxing for any electronic device, did it hold up throughout the shoot for you?
Yeah, it held up better than I did.
Can you talk a little bit more about the tracking AF with the wildlife?
Yeah, an awesome new thing that they've updated is now you can have the eye focus on while also having the tracking focusing mode on. So you're able now to pan a moving animal and still catch the eyes, and that was a huge game changer for me.
Phil, switching over to you, talk a little bit about what you were shooting with the new camera.
Absolutely. So we went out to Willow Springs Raceway, which is just north of Los Angeles, and we shot I think it's like a 60s or maybe a 66 model. Basically, the Shelby from Ford versus Ferrari, the Cobra Shelby, or Shelby Cobra. We had like a professional stunt driver driving around the track there, and it was just like an unbelievable thing to like not only try to capture just because of the conditions of shooting from like sort of sunset to night, but also shooting something that's moving 80 to 100 miles an hour. Zooming right by me. So it was a really cool experience.
Let's talk a little bit more about just how the performance was. I'm always using the word performance when I'm talking to people that have used like a new camera, because I like to get a sense of just how all the different specs, all the tech that's built into it, how it all really comes together, and at the end of the day, in the hands of someone like you, how it performs when you're just trying to get the shot. So like in those conditions, you've got this really fast moving car. You're in, I don't know what the lighting necessarily was like, but talk about just how overall it was performing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when you're thinking about conditions that are favorable to a photographer, you're probably thinking about sort of opposite of the conditions that I was in or that Charlie was in. For us, we were shooting, pitch black, except for some of the lighting that we had. We're shooting super high speed, so high shutter. So there's just like very little light coming into the camera in order to capture fast moving action. So, needed to have, bump the ISO, and really like have a beast of a camera to be able to capture that. And what's so cool to me about the Alpha 1 is that it felt so familiar. I mean, it's, similar body that I'm used to, but just in terms of performance, like, I mean, it blew me away just to be able to capture in those conditions something that's moving so quickly, and just to do it at 30 frames per second with no blackout, which is especially important when a car is, we had the driver. I told the driver, like, get as close to me as you can. Try not to hit me, I guess. But it's really important when you're trying not to get hit by a car to have no blackout when you're looking through the frame. So that was super helpful.
Yeah, I would say that's super helpful to say the very least. We got a couple of questions that were coming through, kind of regarding that high megapixel and fast speed. And so as you were shooting in those, that's really pushing the capabilities. How did it actually work? Did you get were the frames, did you miss frames? Did you get all the frames?
Yeah, no, I mean that's what was crazy is that, when you're in the moment and you capture something that's zooming right by and you're kind of whipping the camera with sort of this fast action, there's always that like, did I get it? Did I not get it? And that, like, really when I was reviewing frames afterwards, that was the moment. I think that was like the wow moment, because especially at 30 frames per second, like, and the autofocus that is refreshing at some insane rate per second, you're just not missing any frames. Like it's nailing autofocus, it's nailing, it's just nailing everything. It's pretty unbelievable. So that was really when I was like, okay, this is definitely something that feels familiar, but it's an entirely different animal.
Charly, going back to you, Phil was just talking about kind of that wow moment. When did you have, if you had a wow moment, photographing especially the wildlife?
I think my wow moment, promotional video that they just released, was we were shooting a herd of bison, and all of a sudden they just kind of like circled around me. So we got all these insane shots of me, and I wasn't expecting them to do that, and my heart was racing, but I was just staying calm, and they were just like watching me, and then they like moved on, so it was totally fine. But it definitely was this epic moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm literally surrounded by these giant beasts, and it was crazy.
I've talked with a few other people today, in the very small group of people that actually had a chance to use this camera before today, and we talked with a lot of people who have had that kind of, been shooting in situations where there are no redos. Phil was really lucky in that he had a car racing around a track and a driver that could kind of go around a few times. But in the wild, with wildlife, you don't really have that. And so, you're really relying on the camera to never let you down. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it definitely, everything was very like, one shot, that's it. Did I miss it? Did I not? And, the camera just performs beautifully. And, they're kind of my favorite photos I've ever taken. I can't wait to finally show them. But yeah, it kept up. The eye focus was incredible. The speed of it also great.
I think we may be losing your audio just a little bit there, Charly. I want to go back to you while we're working on that, Philip. And you do a lot of hybrid shooting, between still and video. How's this camera going to be figuring into what you do moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one point I'll just make about the question that you posed to Charly about those sort of like, moments that you can't miss. It's funny because like we thankfully had a car that could run around a track, but normally for the clients that I work for, like we're dealing with situations that have to be captured within a super limited time frame. I shot Simone Biles for the Olympics, and this is back a year ago, and we thought it was going to be in 2020. But the thing about her was she can only do a movement like a back handspring so many times, because she'll get not that she would get worn out, but that, there's increased potential for injury and all that stuff. So like you have to capture, an athlete doing a movement at the perfect moment without 12 takes, maybe it's 2 or 3 takes. So that's one thing I'm super excited about, to have the additional frame rates for this camera. In terms of like photo and video, like obviously every photographer out there knows that, content is king. That's the name of the game these days. Every client asks for both photo and video. And that's something that, I've integrated into my workflow, but to have a camera that doesn't compromise on either, that I can, switch back and forth seamlessly, and something crazy like 4K 120 or even 8K is pretty unbelievable, and why this camera is just a game changer for me.
Can you talk a little bit more just about that resolution and how important that is? I think that sometimes you think 50 megapixels is what am I going to do with that if I don't necessarily shoot things that are going to go up on a side of a building in Times Square.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are a couple ways to look at it. One way is like, oh man, these are huge files. I think that a lot of the work that I do ends up being in sort of print ad campaigns that goes across social, and just to have that flexibility is huge for me. But I think for so many photographers out there, there are those moments where you're rushing to like turn and capture a moment, and maybe you clipped, you got what you needed, but you clipped, only part of the action, or like you didn't frame it exactly the way that you want. With 50 megapixels, you can crop that however you want, reframe it, center your image 2/3, whatever you want to do, and have an entirely new composition without sacrificing, any sort of resolution.
And Phil, just sticking with you for just a second longer, with doing those shoots with or doing that shoot with the Cobra, and in those lighting conditions, the really fast shutter and everything else, you're pushing the ISO quite a bit. When you were looking at the files, how did the higher ISO images look?
Really impressive. It's funny just because like you're just expecting, you're like, okay, well now I got to shoot this at, it's nighttime, this thing's moving 80 miles an hour. I got to go up to 1/4000th of a second, or 1/2000th of a second, or whatever it is. And then you're just like, oh man, the only way I'm going to capture this is if I push the ISO up to 2500, 4000, something like that. And looking at the images in post, like I was super stoked because I'm planning on printing my images because I want to do a whole series of auto stuff for print, and I was just looking at the images like these are perfect, these are pristine for even a format like print. So whether it's digital or print, like the files just they were super impressive and held up.
Charly, going back to you for just a second, talk to me about how you think this camera is going to figure into the future for you.
I think this camera is my camera. When the team approached me for being on this project, they were like, "This is your dream camera," and it really is. It's really perfect for wildlife photographers with all the settings that I said it has, and the video is amazing. So for me, it has the best of everything.
Philip, Charly, it's really been great to talk to you today. Thank you both for joining us here live, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks everybody else for joining us here today for this special coverage of the new Sony Alpha 1. If you missed any of our live stream today, you can see the rebroadcast on alphauniverse.com and on the Alpha Universe YouTube channel. Subscribe and join alphauniverse.com to stay up to date on all things Sony.